What are traits? Traits are characteristics of people, and these characteristics, they're determined by a mix of genetic and environmental influences. They're influenced by what's called an interaction between nature and nurture. Some traits, such as height or bone density, they characterize physical features. These are called physical traits. And others, like intelligence or friendliness, they characterize personality features. Of course, these are called personality traits. Are there any traits known to be associated with creativity? Are tall people more innovative, for example? Do outgoing people come up with more original, valuable ideas? While physical traits have not been found to be associated with creativity and innovation, some personality traits have. So, what exactly are personality traits? Which ones are most reliably associated with creativity and innovation? And what do these associations tell us about supporting and developing creativity and innovation? Personality traits are patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. And these patterns vary from person to person. There are individual differences in how people tend to think, feel, and act. In terms of defining features, personality traits tend to have a characteristic of steadiness. They're stable over time, meaning they persist from day to day and are consistent across situations. If a person is outgoing in a restaurant or cafe, they're likely going to remain outgoing in a place of worship, like a temple, or at a rock concert or a rap concert. Another defining feature of personality traits is that they influence behavior. They influence how people act. For example, extroversion has been consistently correlated with excitement-seeking behaviors. Now, traits are typically not have or have not. For example, a person doesn't have or not have extroversion. Rather, traits are typically depicted along a spectrum. And for any one trait, a person's tendencies can be placed somewhere along that spectrum. For example, a very well-researched personality spectrum is the introversion-extroversion spectrum. Where would you place yourself along this spectrum? Are you somewhere towards the right, or are you more towards the left? Are you more introverted or more extroverted? It's quite rare for someone to be all the way to the left or all the way to the right along a spectrum. Rather, there are degrees of personal tendencies, degrees of personality tendencies, and people can often gauge their own tendencies on traits. Just as the introversion-extroversion spectrum displays a general personality trait, there are some traits that display and characterize creativity preferences. A well-known one among creativity scholars is Michael Keaton's creative thinking spectrum, also called the adaptation-innovation spectrum. On this spectrum, adapters are placed on one end and innovators are placed on the other. Are you a person who prefers to learn through discussion with other people? If so, you may be more extroverted. Conversely, do you prefer to learn through independent study, through reading on your own? That preference may characterize you as being more introverted, at least in terms of your learning preferences, and perhaps more broadly as well. Like most personality traits, characterizations speak to individual differences and individual preferences. In terms of creative thinking, some people like to work within established conventions. They like to see what's already been done and then come up with creative ways to improve or to iterate. A prime example is Apple CEO Tim Cook. People like Tim Cook prefer to iterate rather than to invent. Cognitive psychologist Michael Keaton referred to people with this preference as adapters. Adapters prefer to work within the established rule sets. On the other hand, some people are not interested in what's already been done. They aren't interested in researching the established conventions and norms. A prime example of this type of person is previous Apple CEO Steve Jobs. People like Steve Jobs, they prefer to start fresh. Keaton called people with this preference innovators. Innovators like to disrupt systems. They like to ignore the rules and find their own ways of addressing problems and attaining their goals. Like introversion and extroversion, most people aren't hard adapters or hard innovators. In fact, many lie somewhere in between. Most people, in fact. Kierton had a name for people with moderate preferences. He called them, you guessed it, middles. While you or I may prefer one or the other approach, it can be argued that some circumstances call for an adaptation approach, while others call for an innovation approach. In some circumstances, it may be better to ideate ways to sustain things that are already going great, whereas in other circumstances, it may be better to ideate on how to solve existing problems. Either way, in my view, we can all benefit from exploring our own creative thinking preferences. And while it's beneficial to build both adaptation skills and innovation skills, we're likely best served by recognizing our strengths and playing to them.